If God has been faithful to you, come on, just stand up and just give him a dance of praise.
Let's talk about protecting education from attack. You know that armed conflict continues to be a major challenge, to education. Now you find bandits go to schools, abduct children, create fear, just to make sure that people don't go to school. And you find that some of these people, they've been traumatized, like some of them that have been lucky to come back. They say they don't want to go near schools.
It's interesting that we're discussing this today, because only yesterday there was a documentary on BBC about the children who had been abducted, and a number of them were interviewed. And of course, one or two said they were not interested in going back to school, but interestingly and happily, some of them said they were still eager to go back to school. But the schools are not open.
Well, in some cases, you want to close the schools because of the security situation.
Yes.
In Kaduna, I think the schools have been reopened after about 2 months closure. But we'll talk about this. We have the education officer at UNICEF, Dr. Judith Giwa Amu. She joins us from our Abuja studios. We also have an education specialist, Jolaolu Guniyi, who is joining us via Zoom from Lagos. Good to have you. Let me start with you, Mr. Laolu Guniyi. We have this statistics. Over 10 million Nigerian children are out of school. That is staggering. And with this continued attacks in schools, where do we go from here?
Thank you. Thank you for having me on the show. It's a challenging situation, and I really must use this medium to sort of sympathize with all those who've been affected by these attacks. Where we go from here, it's a collective effort. I know there's a lot being done at the federal and state level to ensure that these schools are safe. But I think a lot of what must be done now must be more of even prevention. One thing we advocate for is there needs to be this stakeholder engagement with all the stakeholders within those communities. There needs to be that intelligence engagement with the security forces. Intelligence is so crucial in this because that can prevent a lot. I was reading about the Kaduna incident last week, and a letter was seen by the students and taken to their patron who disregarded it. I mean, at that point, that kind of letter should have been taken very seriously and escalated to the security authority. So I think the security architecture at state level is very, very crucial in intelligence gathering and intelligence support to the schools so that it can be prevented, because we cannot provide security overnight. That's impossible. We are grappling with challenges from the pandemic. We're grappling with challenges on our education architecture as a whole that's been with us for a while. And we're taking so many things on at the same time. So one critical thing that must be done now is intelligence from the security forces, engagement with the community leaders, and then advocacy and awareness among even the school personnel, the principals, the head teachers, the teachers, and the parents. It's very, very important, because that will save, that will prevent so many cases of what we are seeing now, at least reduce it. We might not stop it, but it will reduce it. Of course, that goes on to the second challenge, which will be how do they learn? And I think there are a lot of things being done now on remote learning. I think immediately you get that kind of information goes out that there's a challenge and a school is prone to attack at certain points in time. I think there should be a default to remote learning immediately. I think that's very crucial. We know we have challenges of infrastructure, technology infrastructure in various areas of the country, but there are models that can be deployed at rural areas that can support learning, literacy and numeracy for students in the school. And then that takes us to the third challenge, which is psychosocial support. You just mentioned the trauma that some of these children, some of these teachers, and some of the parents will be facing. It's unimaginable. I know when we hear about security challenges around us, the trauma it even gives us without even experiencing it. So I can imagine what these children are going through. So there needs to be that concerted effort to support the teachers through psychosocial support, and the students especially coming back to school. There needs to be a lot of support psychologically for them, and the psychologist has a lot of role to play here. And the state government also has a lot to play in terms of the capacity development of teachers to support all this support system.
Dr. Giwa Amo, he is suggesting that there are other ways that children can learn without having to go into a physical school. But how successful can these other methods be in Nigeria, considering all the challenges that we face, technological and otherwise?
We have various alternate modes of education delivery. Like he mentioned, there's been the radio-based, television-based education, which actually was kind of piloted during the COVID successfully. And there are also ways to assess whether learning is happening. However, learning from home, as much as it's a stopgap, it's an immediate stopgap, because once there is an attack on schools, the first thing to do is in responding is to remove children from an area of threat. However, we know that schools are protective. Sometimes we know we have issues of gender, sexual-based violence at home. And some of the perpetrators are family members, so school is protective. Also, we know that having children, at home, and some of these children maybe in the senior secondary school level, they are science-based, so they need laboratory. They need access to the laboratory. So as much as the immediate response to an attack on schools in areas of high risk, because it is very critical that the risk profile of all schools be known. One, that will help measures to be taken to fill in the gaps. That will also help to say, okay, this is a high-risk school. A high-risk school might be a school that takes 1 hour for security operatives to reach out to them. So if it's a high-risk school, are there things that can be done? Can the children, because when we talk of emergency preparedness, the children can be removed from an area of threat. That is also allowed. So in such situations, you can move the children away from those schools to schools that are, less vulnerable to attack. Okay, so we know that these attacks, indeed, they undermine the right to education, and the security agencies are doing their best to ensure that some of these security situations are put under control. He's talked about the psychosocial impacts, and we've talked about it earlier too. How much of this are you seeing in communities where these attacks have happened? We had Kankara boys being kidnapped the other time. How much of psychosocial support are you seeing in some of these areas that have witnessed attacks on schools? Okay, I want to say the place of psychosocial support is very critical. In fact, it's mental health psychosocial support, because I look at what is happening like a silent epidemic, where children that have been traumatized need to be followed up. Because at the end of the day, we are talking of an out-of-school figure of over 10 million. We are saying that 1 child out of every 5 children out of school lives in Nigeria. So it is very, very critical that we are able to ensure that these children are, provided, especially after going through such a traumatizing incident, they are followed up by counselors. Those that need to be referred to medical services are referred.
because without doing this, children will drop out. Without doing this, those that even stay in the education stream, their concentration span is, is almost zero. And the teachers also who are affected, because the teachers are the source of education. And we know that an educated society is as good as the children or the youth who are educated. Now, the teachers, some of them, as a result of, the effects, you notice school absenteeism, teachers are not coming to school. So a further gap is being created. We know that, learning is something that needs to be happening. It has to happen for youth, children to be able to contribute their own quota to the development of Nigeria. Now, if they are not able to have schooling, if they're not able to acquire skills and knowledge, then they end up being illiterate. An illiterate society is one in which the human capital, the human mass, become opened to recruitment into, non-state armed groups, and that does not portend a very bright future for Nigeria.
Mr. Olaolu Oguni, you've talked about expanding online schooling or training for students. Let's look at Nigeria. We know we have a bit of challenges when it comes to networking and all of that. And talking about remote areas, how would this work? How do you think this can work?
Thank you. I think Nigeria is not the only one that's having this challenge. And we have other countries that are also having this challenge. And they've succeeded in putting in place great architecture to support learning. My colleague from UNICEF just mentioned one, which is radio learning, which is very, very effective. But the critical thing there is there needs to be support. I mean, a teacher cannot create lessons for a radio program. There needs to be that support, especially at the state level, to put things in place in a way that once there's a default mode to remote learning, then it's easy for the teacher to ensure and follow up on his pupils during this kind of disruptions. There are areas where people use written materials are supplied ab initio before students go home, and students can be followed up on, and learning still takes place. So there are other ways. There's also television, and there are also the radio boxes that are supplied to students to ensure that learning takes place. So it's very doable, but there needs to be a lot of infrastructural support that will be given, digital infrastructural support that needs to be given. There are areas where there are local area networks to support teachers with digital gadgets. So there are different scenarios, but the state government, who's actually in charge of basic education and secondary education, needs to actually take it by the scuff and provide that architecture. I know a lot is being done right now by many states, and they need to put that architecture in place in such a way that once students are in default mode, teachers can easily fall back to these resources and ensure that learning takes place.
Staying with you, Mr. Olaolu Oguni, we have conflict in our nation, and since last year we've also had the issue of the pandemic, so children could not go to school. By you, how successful has remote learning been in light of the conflicts that we have and the pandemic put together?
Great. We have a very diversified education sector. There are private schools, there are public schools. I think the public schools have been terribly hit. But the private schools actually, for some of the private schools, because we also have low-cost private schools who also have challenges also. But I think the high-end private schools succeeded in going through remote learning easily. For public schools, there was little to no learning that took place. I know some state governments, like Lagos State, actually did a lot of work on remote learning. I need to give it to them. So there was that continuous learning in the schools through radio, through television, and through supply of materials. But one thing the pandemic did to us was that it actually helped us to see the challenges we have in our whole ecosystem. That was what brought all this into the limelight, that look, we have challenges with remote learning. Right now, I won't say we're 100% in ensuring learning through remote learning. If I'll score it, I'll probably score 40%. But there's a lot of work that is going on. I know UNICEF themselves are working with the Federal Ministry of Education and Teachers Registration Council, designing a remote learning curriculum to help teachers in different areas of the country to ensure that learning takes place. And this, I know that there's going to be a training initiative for teachers across a lot of states in Nigeria. I know that's happening, but we're not there yet. I think there's a lot of support from developmental agencies. The federal MDAs are also working assiduously towards it. I think if we continue this way, provide the right infrastructure to support the teachers, I think on the long run, we'll have a formidable remote learning platform to support education.
Okay, Dr. Giwa Amu, let me quickly read to you these figures from the Global Coalition to Protect Education from Attack, and it says in the past 6 years, 13,400 reports of attacks have been collated by this coalition, and it shows attacks on education or military use of educational facilities worldwide, with more than 25,000 students, teachers, and academics injured, killed, or harmed in such attacks. What does this kind of statistic portend for education?
Well, the Global Coalition to Protect Education from Attack is the body that globally has the mandate to come up with strategies, mechanisms to protect education from attack. When you have those kind of figures, it's actually portending a lot of doom because, like we said, when attacks on education became very noticeable in 2014, schools were identified as by parents as zones of danger. And now we are having more issues of it. So, but beyond this, schools are not only being attacked, homes are being attacked. So it is very worrisome because the homes are neither safe nor secure. And then also, when we talk of these attacks, we have to continue to make sure that we factor in the issue of the teachers, the students. In the 2020 to 2021 academic session alone, over 1.3 million children in Nigeria had disrupted education, and this actually amounts to over 3.4 billion of losses made on investment on these children. So when you look at this in terms of their future, for them to be able to utilize the education they have received, it is very, very worrisome. It's also a challenge to countries that have endorsed what we call the Safe School Declaration. This Safe School Declaration is a global treaty that commits countries that have endorsed to take deliberate action to protect education from attack. So Nigeria is one of the first 37 countries that endorsed the Safe School Declaration in May 2015, and then officially it was signed into law by the Honorable Minister of Federal Ministry of Education, Malam Adamu. It was also approved in 2019 by the President Muhammadu Buhari for giving approval for ratification. Now, what has happened is that the ratification instrument, which is the National Policy on Safety, Security, and Violence-Free Schools, its implementation guidelines, and then minimum standards that specify a school as being safe. These have been approved by the National Council on Education, and I think now the onus is for us to run with speed to start, operationalizing, domesticating this Safe School Declaration. This is also linked to an upcoming, because Nigeria has done a lot of work on Safe School Declaration, and other countries are borrowing from it. This is, like I said, linked to a 4th international conference, which will be holding in October 25th to 27th, in which, and Nigeria is the first African country where it's going to be held. And it's also the first country that it's been held where attacks are actively happening. What do we even expect? We expect situation whereby countries will come, because it's going to be a hybrid event, and share best practices. What has worked in other countries? What can we borrow? What are the challenges, and what new things can we learn? So it is very, very crucial that, the government, and, because education is on the concurrent list, it is very important that the state governments actually working in a whole society approach between the education sector and the security sector and other sectors that need to come in. They need to work together to be able to make sure that the schools are safe and secure and conducive and protective for learning. And they need to also take advantage of the community. The community is one of the most strategic partners because it is in the immediate vicinity of the schools. We know most of our schools are in the community. And so the working to build the capacity of the community to best protect using some non-armed measures, to be able to protect the schools, take responsibility and play their role is critical. But again, like I said, the risk profile has to be identified, and then certain school-based interventions must be supported by commitment of the state government. We're talking of resources. So resources have to be, provided for these schools to be able to, build capacity in what we call conflict-sensitive disaster risk reduction. So this is critical. It involves school plans that are developed participatorily with the learners, with the teachers, and they need to be trained on this plan. We're talking of early warning systems, that have functional communication systems. We're talking of interface between the local security architecture, it might be the vigilantes, and those, at the state level, the civil defense and other bodies under the Ministry of Defense.
Mr. Lalogni, I'm happy that Dr. Giwamo mentioned teachers in in her submission just now, because I was just thinking, are all these happenings not affecting the psyche of teachers such that many people will not want to go into the profession, and those who are there may want out because they don't feel safe in their comfort zones anymore?
Very right. The teachers are being traumatized themselves. The psychosocial support that will be required will also be to also support the teachers because they've gone through a lot of trauma. It's not easy. Some being kidnapped themselves. It's not easy. Some experiencing their peers of students being kidnapped. It's not an easy experience. And then the safety issues around the environment. The teachers have been seriously affected. But there are teachers who are just passionate about education. Those teachers will stay. Those teachers are very particular about education. They go the extra mile to ensure that their students learn, and those teachers are still there. They are still there. All they need is the moral support, the psychosocial support, the mental support, like my colleague alluded to, is very, very important because that's what will help them pass through this very challenging period. And also the activities taking place, when there's a lot of activities taking place around protecting the schools, around profiling the schools, and sort of segmenting them into high risk and low risk, then teachers see that there's a lot of effort put into their protection. There's a lot of training that been put in place for them to ensure that they can even identify challenging situations or high-risk situations. Teachers, there are teachers who enjoy teaching. Trust, they love the profession, and it's almost it's a passion for them. It's difficult to get them off teaching. So with the right support, with the right encouragement, I think that will be, on the long run, will not be much of an issue. But there needs to be that support. There needs to be that moral support. There needs to be working condition support. And there needs to be that mental support for the teachers, because they are going through a lot, considering even the conditions in which they work. It's challenging. It's really challenging.
Education sector needs all of the support it can get at this time. We would like to thank you so much for your time this morning on the program. We've been having a chat with the Education Officer, UNICEF, Dr. Judith Giwa Amu, and of course, an education specialist, Jolaolu Oguneyi. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us this morning. We'll be back in a moment. Please stay with us.